Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Paris Schutz. Brandis Friedman has the evening off. On the show tonight, Wall Street reacts to businessman Elon Musk buying Twitter. What could the acquisition mean for free speech?
We are working to educate and communicate with folks across the city who have concerns about it.
Mayor Lightfoot's proposal to fight crime by going after gang profits remains stalled in City Council. Chicago moves up on the list of cities with the worst air quality in the nation. What's being done to address it? There's a bird flu outbreak in the U.S., including in Illinois. Advice on how to help stop the spread. Staff at the Chicago Reader protest as the future of the alternative newspaper remains uncertain amid an effort to go nonprofit. The country's largest meat processing company is spending millions to give its workers free college. That and more from Cranes.
When you start cutting it right away, it's fairly soft.
We hear about creative efforts to reimagine invasive or dead trees.
And son of a gun, when we put it in the front fryer, it held together.
And a look at the fourth-generation family business that created one of Chicago's most enduring fried fast food favorites. But first, some of today's top stories. The warmest weekend of the year brought with it a rash of shootings in Chicago. According to Chicago police, 8 people were killed and 42 were shot in 32 separate shootings between Friday and Sunday nights when temperatures jumped into the 80s for the first time this year. In one incident, 2 men were killed and 2 others were injured in a drive-by shooting Saturday on the 1900 block of West Garfield Boulevard. The men were standing outside when someone inside a gray vehicle opened fire. A 42-year-old and 48-year-old were both struck multiple times and killed. Life expectancy in Chicago dropped by almost 2 years during the first year of the COVID-19 pandemic. That's according to a new report from the Chicago Department of Public Health, which says the drop from 2019 to 2020 was one of the largest on record. The sharpest falls came for the city's Latino and Black residents. Latino residents seeing a 3-year drop in life expectancy. CDPH says that for the first time in decades, life expectancy for Black residents has fallen below 70 years. That puts the life expectancy gap between Black and white residents at 10 years. Life expectancy for Chicagoans of Asian and Pacific Islander descent dropped by 2 years, and for white Chicagoans by 1 year. CDPH says that while COVID was a significant driver, it was only the second leading cause of death in 2020, behind heart disease. A Bulls starter could be sidelined for the team's next playoff game. Alex Caruso is in concussion protocol and could miss Game 5 of the playoff series against the Milwaukee Bucks. The Bulls guard left Game 4 on Sunday after getting hit in the face by an inadvertent elbow from Bucks guard Javon Carter. Caruso is one of the Bulls' best defenders, and he'd be a big loss if he is indeed sidelined for what will be an elimination game for the Bulls. After losing 2 games at home, the Bulls must win Wednesday in Milwaukee against the NBA champions to keep the best-of-7 series alive. And up next, what's next for the mayor's proposal to go after gang profits? So please stay with us.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
Wednesday marks Chicago's next city council meeting, but one item that won't be on the agenda is Mayor Lightfoot's plan to go after gang profits. That plan remains stalled 2 months after it was introduced and quickly greeted by a wave of criticism. WTTW News reporter Heather Sharon joins us now with more. Heather, remind us what this ordinance would do.
Well, it would allow the city to sue gang leaders and the gang organizations themselves for any profits that they earn from their criminal activities. And the mayor has really put this at the center of her plan to address the really serious surge in crime and violence in Chicago, saying it was really crucial, but it hasn't gotten off the ground.
And last week, the mayor was asked where this ordinance stood. Take a look at what she said.
We are working to educate and communicate with folks across the city who have concerns about it.
So, remind us of the opponents and some of their concerns about this.
Well, really, the leading opponent of this measure has been the ACLU of Illinois, which has been really strident in their concerns that it would target really Black and Latino Chicagoans and people and families who could least afford it, while doing nothing to address the serious gang problem in Chicago, because those organizations are small and diffuse. But it's also been criticized by the president of the Fraternal Order of Police, no fan of the ACLU, John Catanzara, who said it's pure political theater. So there was not really a whole lot of support for this measure, which is why it remains stalled 2 months after it made it out of the Public Safety Committee.
And at this point, Heather, I mean, is there any path to victory for the mayor, or does she just need to admit defeat on this one?
Well, she is truly reluctant to admit defeat, although I haven't seen any path to a vote of 26 alder people in favor of it. This proposal has been out there since September. It's already been revised significantly to try to address some of the criticism, and it's really gotten nowhere. This would be a massive defeat for Mayor Lightfoot because, as you know, parents, usually what Chicago mayors want, they get from the city council, but it's clear that the Chicago City Council has no appetite for this proposal whatsoever.
I certainly can't say it's a rubber stamp city council, at least not on this issue. All right, Heather Sharon, thank you as always.
Thanks, Paris.
And you can read Heather's full story as well as the ordinance proposal on our website. It's all at WTTW.com/news. Chicago's air pollution levels are among the worst in the nation. That's according to the American Lung Association. The agency ranks Chicago, the city, with the 16th worst air quality in the nation. And that report comes on the heels of Mayor Lori Lightfoot's plan to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 60% by 2025. And joining us now are Angela Tin, National Senior Director of Clean Air Initiatives at the American Lung Association, and Anthony Moser, a founding member with the group Neighbors for Environmental Justice. And we should note we invited a representative from the city, but they declined our offer. Tonight, we're glad that you're with us. First, Angela Tin, what landed Chicago at the 16th spot on this list of most polluted cities?
This is an ongoing evaluation that occurs every year. And last year, Chicago was the 16th, and Chicago again continues to be the 16th worst.
And Angela Tin, we're looking at things like ozone and particulate matter. So break down the difference between those things.
Okay. Ozone is formed by the chemical reaction between nitrogen oxides, sunlight, heat, and chemicals, and they form together in the atmosphere to continue to combine and form into ozone.
And then particulate matter are the little dust particles that folks breathe in that are also very unhealthy, correct?
Yes, and particulate matter includes dust, but it also includes some water droplets and some soil and some organic components, pollen and things like that.
And Anthony Moser, earlier in the program, we talked about how life expectancy has dropped, especially among Black and Latino communities in Chicago. How does air pollution play into that, especially in different neighborhoods throughout the city?
Sure. So air pollution, first of all, there's no really safe levels of air pollution. And one thing that we know is that it is correlated with higher mortality, more severe cases of COVID if you get it. There are a lot of different ways that it can affect your health. And the city of Chicago has done its own mapping of where there is the greatest risk and the greatest health impact from air pollution. So, like, there's a very well-established kind of red zone, especially along the southwest side and along the west side, where the industrial corridors are, that have been experiencing the worst air pollution and a lot of health consequences as a result of that.
And Angela Tin, again, Chicago ranking 16th this year. It is the third largest metro region. Is there some solace to the fact that it's not the third worst in the nation?
Well, it continues to be not good, but again, there is very slow improvement, especially in the area of ozone.
Talk about what's caused that improvement. I mean, we've had some coal-fired power plants shut down in the last 10 years. What are the factors that are causing improvement in the city?
Well, one of the major things is that it comes from the combustion of generally automobiles, engines, and mobile transportation sources. So we continually have the number of vehicles that traverse the streets of Chicago, and they don't go less. There still continue to be abundant numbers. Now, in addition, we've had a lot more mass transit vehicles and other opportunities for people to reduce the pollution by using alternate forms of transportation, alternative fuels, and other types of engine sources like electric vehicles.
So some slight improvements. Anthony Moser, there have been a lot of debates over the last few years, especially on the South Side, South Chicago, and the rejection of General Iron moving in there. But talk about the health impacts of air pollution on people in places like Little Village or South Chicago because of all that industry.
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways the health impacts are pretty well documented. I mean, air pollution can shorten your lifespan in a bunch of different ways. And I think one of the things that we really need to see the city do is move past just cataloging this stuff, right, and move past just measuring air quality. Like the new Climate Action Plan proposes these air quality sensors. There's a lot of data that we already have, but for data to matter, you need to act on it. And that means, you know, when we're talking about vehicle traffic or trucks and cars, and there's a lot of warehousing connected to that stuff, generates a lot of air pollution. Like, we need to take action to reduce emissions from these sources. So it's not enough for us to just measure air pollution and say we know that the air quality in your neighborhood is bad. We have to go past that and say what is making it bad and what can we do to make it better.
And in fact, Angela Tin, the mayor, has proposed a 60% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2025. And when you look at, you know, Chicago, its status as a central transportation hub, all the industry and all the traffic that remains, is that really achievable?
Well, one thing that we found out that, you know, this data collected during the years of 2018, 19, and 20. And in 2020, this was when the COVID was about, and we had a reduced level of transportation. And even that reduction in the amount of traffic, the air pollution monitors did not show hardly any improvement. So we need to reduce the number of vehicles by using alternative fuels and alternative transportation sources and alternative engines even more than we are currently doing today.
And we'll have to see if that's a big part of this plan for the city going forward. Anthony, you mentioned that your organization has crowdfunded air monitors and different ways to sort of mitigate pollution in certain neighborhoods. Tell us more about these efforts.
Sure. I mean, we have done our own air monitoring just on a community basis, pretty much starting from when Matt Asphalt opened up in 2018 across from McKinley Park, which is kind of what got us started and organizing. And so that's been something that we've, done to try and demonstrate that the problem is real. And we have data that shows that. And the thing is, the city also has a lot of data that shows that. So I think they also have a lot of complaints, that have been filed. So I think they kind of know where a lot of the problem areas are. And really what we need to see is movement around addressing those problems. And so, like, you said 60% reduction there in greenhouse gases is the target. I noticed in the city's climate action plan that they said that 17% of our greenhouse gas emissions come from manufacturing industries and construction. And a lot of those manufacturing industries are located all along the southwest side in the industrial corridors. But a good question is then how much of that industrial activity and how much of that construction is a direct result of city contracting and city projects. We need to quantify the emissions that are being generated by the city's own projects and proposals if we're going to be able to cut the emissions by 60%, if that's the goal.
And as I understand, Matt Asphalt in McKinley Park, they do produce asphalt that the city uses to pave roads. So a lot of things to look at here, and our thanks to Angela Tin and Anthony Moser.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The social media world is all a Twitter today. That's because the social media giant has announced billionaire Tesla CEO and SpaceX founder Elon Musk will buy the platform for about $44 billion and take it private. This comes as the EU has passed sweeping new regulations to root out disinformation and hate speech on social media. And joining us now with more are Ari Cohn, a local First Amendment and defamation attorney who serves as free speech counsel for the DC-based Tech Freedom think tank, and Richard Smith, CEO of the investor risk management app Risk Smith. Welcome both of you here to Chicago Tonight. Ari Cohn, Elon Musk has certainly tweeted a lot about his intentions with Twitter, but what does this takeover portend for the social media giant?
It's hard to tell at this point. Elon Musk has said a whole bunch of things that he wants to do, and some of them, might be good ideas, and a lot of people do think they're good ideas. What remains to be seen is how easily it'll be accomplished. There's a lot that he wants to do, and some of it I think is more feasible than others. So it's going to be a while before we can really tell what the impact is going to be.
And Richard Smith, take us inside this $44 billion deal and why Musk pursued it.
I think it's a mission and passion project for him. I think he's been working on this for decades now, going back to his work with PayPal. He wants a more free, a more decentralized economy. I think he thinks this is the best thing he can do with his money, that he's gotten himself into this position and he can make this play for something that he really believes in. And I do think it's an authentic and sincere belief on his part that Twitter is a critical, serves a critical function for society, and he's not happy with the way it's going, and he thinks it can be better.
And Ari Cohn, he says he's a free speech absolutist, and he'd be loath to really edit anything or suspend any accounts. But what could that look like when you see bad actors on social media that spread disinformation, they spread hate speech, and those things do lead to things like mob violence or some other kind of violence?
Well, so he says he wants to allow pretty much all speech that's legal, but even that's not necessarily true. He wants to get rid of the bots and he wants to get rid of the spam, which I fully support him on. But those things are still protected speech. It's really hard to, I guess it's a nice soundbite to say you want all the speech that's legal to be on there, but it's a much more different thing, practically speaking. And even the platforms that have come as kind of trying to pose as free speech alternatives all have rules that forbid certain speech that is constitutionally protected. Things like doxing, some platforms forbid even though it's constitutionally protected. So there's going to be line drawing one way or the other. And I think what also makes it complicated is determining what speech is or isn't legal is something only humans can do, and it's going to take a lot of them. Content moderation at scale is impossible, so impossible that we'll probably never actually master it. So it's going to be a really complicated thing to do. But on top of that, you also have to build a platform that people want to use. There's going to be some content that people aren't going to use the platform if they see that content, and there's going to be some content that advertisers don't want to put their advertisements next to. There's going to be line drawing, and there's going to be some kind of judgment. And that's the impossible part of content moderation. No matter what lines you draw and no matter where you draw them, those judgments are always going to be disagreed with by someone. People can't even agree on what free speech is.
Given the volume of posts every second, it seems like an impossible task here. Richard Smith, the other thing he says he wants to do is shed some light on these algorithms that Twitter uses to boost posts or that make posts go viral. How could that impact a company and the user experience?
Well, let me just make one point from Ari's comments. Musk does not have a completely free hand here. He did have to borrow a lot of money and do a lot of financing in order to make this deal possible. So he's under some market constraints still. I don't think he has quite the free hand that he wishes he did. But getting back to the algorithm question, I do think that's one of the most exciting developments here. And while I agree with Ari that there's lots of room for, what is free speech and what's not, what I love about this deal is that I feel like it really opens up the conversation in a whole new way. And even if this deal hadn't closed, I still would have been considered Musk to have won for starting this conversation in the way that he has. And the fact that he's willing to put his money where his mouth is and back it up and actually take responsibility for this, that's a big take. you know? So the algorithm part is huge. The idea of transparency around how algorithms are making decisions for us, I think, is huge. It's something I've been an advocate for a long time. It's why I'm developing technology, because my main concern is that we are being manipulated by these algorithms behind the scenes. They're behavior modification programs, you know, for corporate profit motives. Musk obviously isn't going to be free from that, and I'm not saying all of that should go away, but more transparency around that, more choice. I think this ultimately ties into Musk's and Jack Dorsey's, by the way, let's not forget about him, interest in cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin. So I think this is a sea change and a banner day in social media and big tech.
Ari Cohen, we mentioned at the top that this comes just after the EU passed these sweeping new regulations on these tech companies to police disinformation and hate speech. Remind us what these regulations would do.
So, you know, in other countries, there's a lot of speech that is protected by our First Amendment that isn't protected in those countries. And those countries are going to regulate and try and punish or fine platforms for not moderating that content, which in the US, the government absolutely could not forbid or punish social media platforms for hosting. And it really speaks to the problems of internet regulation, because one country might regulate content in some way, and that creates a compliance nightmare sometimes when there's all these different jurisdictions that a company has to deal with. And so then it becomes a question of, do I deal with each of those countries separately, or do I make my policies based around the most restrictive country? I actually agree with Richard also. I have to say that there's some things about his transparency ideas that are valid. He's really hit on a critical point that people don't trust how the platforms are being run and how they're being moderated. It's undeniable that that's true. And to that extent, when he says that he wants to maybe note in tweets when they've been prioritized or deprioritized and what the platform has done with them, I think that's a cool idea to try. And I really like that this really exhibits the way in which laws like Section 230 here in the US permit these platforms to come up with these new ideas and play around with them without a lot of the risk that's inherent in trying to do that.
And on that issue of transparency, Richard Smith, the other thing he says is he wants to just root out all the bots that are on there and make sure that they're verified humans using that platform. We know bots, they spread misinformation or they spread strange speech. Can that actually be accomplished?
Well, I think the key piece is verified humans, right? I'm not sure how he's going to do that without, KYI, KYC, know your customer, disclosing who you are, et cetera. How do you verify a human while still maintaining privacy, if that's what you want, which I don't think he intends to eliminate that option. So, these are great ideas, good aspirations. The devil's in the details, no doubt about it. But the fact that he is calling these problems out and saying he wants to do something about them is very encouraging.
All right. Well, go ahead, Ari. Just really quickly. Make one more point.
I think the verified humans part is the part where there's a little bit more room for concern. I think that a lot of people want to stay anonymous on Twitter, whether it's because they don't want it tied so that their employer can find out, or they're part of a marginalized group where it might be dangerous. But even if you don't have to post under your real name and it's just verified, Twitter has that information about your identity. And there are other countries where the government has no compunction about coming and saying, hey, well, give me the identities of these dissidents. And that worries me. There's a lot of problems with stripping anonymity.
So social media, as an entity is like 20 years old, and still there's so much to be figured out about how this should operate in the best interest of everybody involved. All right. Our thanks to Ari Cohen and Richard Smith. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And up next, meet the family behind a beloved fried food. So stay with us.
Certainly we can celebrate, but we also have to recognize what so many people have gone through because of racism and what people continue to go through.
I think that Americans are finally beginning to embrace that we are African, we are indigenous, we are European, we are Asian, we are everything.
And There's much more ahead on the program, including a look at the impact of the bird flu outbreak here and across the country. But first, from Saganaki to the Jibarito, Chicago's blend of cultures has resulted in a long and delicious list of culinary innovations. One particular Chicago food favorite started with an Assyrian family that folded together Italian and Mexican ingredients to create a hot dog stand staple. Producer Erica Gunderson has the story, and we admit it's a puff piece.
There's no other city that I know of that's better at doing quick service items. And certainly pizza puffs are a big part of that.
The pizza puff has been on the menu at Byron's Hot Dogs for more than 40 years. Byron's president Mike Payne says the humble pastry pocket's staying power is proof that it belongs in the pantheon of great Chicago foods.
It doesn't take rocket science to cook them, that's for sure. You take them out of the package, you put it in the deep fryer, and you wait until it's done and you're done.
Since its introduction in 1976, millions of pizza puffs have been pressed, filled, hand-folded, and packaged for commercial and retail sale in Il Taco Foods' Westtown facility.
I am right now standing outside the pizza puff line, and let me tell you, if you're anything like me, this is very exciting. It's like standing outside the gates of the Willy Wonka chocolate factory. Beautiful things are happening in there, and I can't wait to see it.
It's made from scratch every single day, whether it be the filling or the dough that we make every day, and then we hand fold them. So
our employees work their tails off here, and it's very appreciated every day.
They're really good at what they do, and they really have a passion and appreciate it.
You could be forgiven for thinking a company named Il Taco makes, well, tacos. But
So that stands for Illinois Tamale Company. That would have started with my grandfather. That would be Elisha Chavez.
In 1927, Elisha Chavez bought a company making Chicago-style rolled tamales for pushcart vendors. When Warren Chavez took the company over in 1964, he condensed the name to Il Taco. By the 70s, Warren Chavez says the hot dog stands his company served were ready for something new.
My brother and I grew up in an all-Italian neighborhood. And Panzerottis and calzones were huge back then. And I had a buddy called Art Velasquez. He owned Azteca Corn Products. And I said, listen, Art, let me take some of your tortillas.
Warren and his brother Edward used the tortilla dough as a wrapper for a spicy, pizza-flavored filling. He says making a pocket that could take the plunge in the deep fryer without splitting open took some trial and error. But
And son of a gun, when we put it in the French fryer, it held together, and it was amazing.
Il Taco added the pizza puff to its lineup, and it took off across the city. As the company grew, the family grew too, and Warren folded his children Alicia, Andrew, and Adam into the family business.
Of course, I used to force them to come down here. They'd come down here work in the summer.
Myself, I can't fold a pizza puff. It goes by too fast. The worst part about it was doing the taco puff and having to peel all the onions.
That's before we... Yes.
By far. I mean, eyes just running.
Over the past 20 years, the siblings have left other jobs to become the fourth generation of the family to run Il Taco.
We've grown substantially, and it's just been so fun to do it with two of my best friends, basically, and enjoy it every day doing it. So it's been wonderful.
I'm extremely proud of the three kids. Sometimes I almost can get the tears because that they're here.
And they say their hope is a fifth round of Chavez's will be ready to take over one day.
It's extremely important that we do stay with it as a family company, and it would be great to see the next generation be a part of it if they want to.
Because my son right now, he drills about 3 pizza puffs a day, and it's not a joke.
I feel privileged. We feel privileged. I can speak for my brothers. It's a privilege.
Well, thank you for eating those puffs.
For Chicago Tonight, this is Erica Gunderson.
And you might have spotted the for sale sign on the Il Taco plant in Westtown. That's because the company is planning a big move, but they're not going far. The new facility will be on the north side, Brynford Park neighborhood, and they're anticipating a move in early 2023. And still to come on Chicago Tonight, property groups are putting together a more than $8 billion offer for Kohl's. That and more business news from Cranes. Staff of the Chicago Reader protests as the future of the alternative newspaper remains uncertain amid an effort to go nonprofit. We hear from one of its board members. Illinois is one of several states being affected by a bird flu outbreak. We talk with veterinarians about how to help stop the spread. And invasive tree species may be threatening Chicago's native wildlife, but some local efforts are turning the ecological problems into works of art. But first, some more of today's top stories. A New York judge holds former President Donald Trump in civil contempt for failing to comply with a subpoena to turn over documents. New York Attorney General Letitia James has been investigating the Trump Organization for more than 2 years in relation to alleged misstatements and omissions in the organization's financial statements. This morning, Judge Arthur Engoron made clear his feelings about the former president's failure to comply with the court's order to turn over documents, saying, quote, "Mr. Trump, I know you take your business seriously, and I take mine seriously. I hereby hold you in civil contempt and fine you $10,000 per day until you purge that contempt." And Trump plans to appeal the decision, according to his attorney. Suburban Crestwood's former mayor Louis Presta was sentenced to 1 year in federal prison today after pleading guilty to bribery and other charges. The 72-year-old Presta, seen here during his campaign for Cook County Commissioner, was caught in an FBI sting accepting an apparent $5,000 bribe from an executive at a red light company called Safe Speed. The executive was secretly cooperating with the feds. In delivering the sentence, U.S. District Judge Thomas Durkin said Presta had, quote, diminished Crestwood's community by taking a bribe to, quote, jack up red light camera tickets on anyone driving through town. Applications are open for Chicago's Guaranteed Income Pilot Program. The city opened applications on its website at 9 o'clock this morning. The program offers guaranteed cash assistance of $500 a month for 1 year via either bank transfer or debit card. It'll target low-income Chicagoans who have experienced hardship due to the pandemic and is funded to the tune of $31 million using federal pandemic relief money. The deadline for applying is Friday, May 13th. The owners of JCPenney are offering more than $8 billion for another major American department store. The country's biggest meat company wants to give its workers free college tuition, and Chicago's South Shore community sees its first modular home. Here to go behind the headlines is Crain's Chicago business editor Ann Dwyer. Ann, great to see you as always. It's not the biggest transaction announced today, but the owners of JCPenney want to buy Kohl's department store now for $8.6 billion. What's behind this deal?
Well, the offer is coming from Simon Properties and Brookfield Asset Management, Paris, which, of course, are two of the biggest mall operators in the country. And I think that they're betting that it's in their interest to see if there's a way for them not only to rescue JCPenney, which they bought out of bankruptcy back in 2020, but also to keep Kohl's afloat. They're estimating that they can wring about $1 billion worth of savings out of Kohl's if they combine management operations and find other efficiencies. Now, if they do that, they're saying that they want to keep both of these brands operating and under their own nameplates. And if they can manage to pull this off, then it's definitely to Simon and Brookfield's benefit. It means that they don't have to worry about losing these two very major tenants.
Two big historic brands still going. Tyson Foods says it's going to spend $60 million for thousands of its employees to attend college. How come?
Well, you know, it's proved very difficult in this low unemployment atmosphere to keep workers on the line at meatpacking plants. So companies like Tyson, which of course has a big operation here in Chicago through the old Hillshire Brands label, are putting everything they can out there in front of potential workers and saying, hey, come be with us. We want to invest in you. So it's potentially, this is something that could help about 120,000 U.S. workers at Tyson to gain higher education, to even gain management degrees, MBAs. And Tyson is saying that they'd like to do this to keep people on the factory floor and also to try to hire internally into the executive ranks.
Certainly a way to entice workers in this labor market. And lastly, a developer has completed one modular home in Chicago's South Shore community. Remind us what a modular home is and why this is significant.
Well, it's significant because, we've talked about this so often, Paris. The affordable housing crunch in this city is real. And a lot of affordable housing advocates have been calling for more creative ways to create housing stock that people can get into at a good price point. And these modular homes are being offered up as a potential solution. And basically, these are homes that are built. This one particular development that we're writing about today features buildings that are going to be built and have been built in Archer Heights at a factory there. These are basically homes that are largely built in pieces on the factory floor and then assembled at the job site. And a lot of advocates that we're talking to say this could be a great way to bring better price point homes down to South Shore and other neighborhoods. And by the way, South Shore is seeing prices rise just as much, if not more so, than a lot of other neighborhoods in the city.
Kind of like an update on those old Sears catalog homes. All right.
Exactly.
Ann, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, the future of the Chicago Reader is in doubt. This as a dispute drags on between staff members and one of the paper's current owners, attorney Len Goodman. The paper had been on track to switch over to a non-profit model, but contention stemming from an op-ed column Goodman wrote on vaccines has held it up. Here's what a staff writer had to say at a recent protest.
If you don't transition into a nonprofit, our grant-funded racial justice reporting hub and writer's room will not happen, and I could possibly lose my job. Len, you are preventing us from welcoming a new generation of writers who are eager to offer fresh new perspectives, which contradicts your claims about censorship.
And joining us to discuss the future of the Reader and what's at stake is Bob Ryder, president of the Chicago Federation of Labor. He is a member of the Chicago Reader Institute for Community Journalism, non-for-profit board, and the Chicago Reader L3C for-profit board. And we should note we also invited Len Goodman to the conversation, but he did not respond to our request this evening. Bob, thank you for being with us. You know, Reader staffers have said that the paper is days away from running out of money. How long does it have?
We're essentially on borrowed time right now, and thank God that the Reader is continuing to sell ads, and that there's people who support the Reader, and I know that it's sort of day by day, and we're hoping that we can bring this transition from for-profit to not-for-profit to fruition, and we can protect this Chicago institution of journalism on a going forward basis. And by the way, Paris, how you doing?
I'm doing fine. So the plan's been agreed to by the owners, Len Goodman and LZ Higginbottom, and the staff. So remind us why the holdup.
So everyone, I think, is in agreement that the Reader should be moving towards a not-for-profit model. I know that, Len has been supportive of this, generally for a very long time. I know that LZ has been in favor of this for a very long time. The issue is about other things in the ether. It's not about a question of whether this is the right financial model for the Reader. It's about how do we get to the transition? How do we get to closing? We were supposed to see this move happen at the end of December. Here we are. We're at the end of April. We need to make sure that we get this thing moving.
Is this all about that column? And as a reminder to our viewers, Goodman he wrote a column. He's one of the owners, wrote an op-ed column that was controversial, but apparently approved by editors. Or are there other things at play here?
Well, I don't want to speak for Leonard. I'm here, representing myself as a board member appointed by LZ Higginbottom, respected, Black business leader here in Chicago. But I will tell you from my perspective that, Len's column was sort of the flashpoint for this change in positioning about how to get to the sale. I think that it's taken the column's role in this is becoming outsized in what the 50-some year history of the Reader is. And I know that Len and Elsie both support community journalism, and I know from our side of the fence in terms of Len, Elsie, and myself that we're eager to get to conclusion.
How could a nonprofit model keep the Reader going and keep the journalism going strong for the foreseeable future?
So, as we all know, Reader, beloved, Chicago institution. It's free. Used to come out every week, comes out every other week. The nature of how ad sales and marketing has changed in the digital age hasn't made the printed copy less relevant, but how people engage with advertising. A lot of relevant, advertising opportunities for the Reader, for people who want to engage with print advertising. But it'd be silly to say that we're not competing for ad dollars in other spaces. And the Reader does a ton of digital advertising, but it's changed. So the way to make sure that a voice like the Reader that goes in the direction of controversial and provocative stories survives is by going to places that want to support community journalism, like foundations and other donors who want to support that mission. Because access to good information, fact-checked stories, columns that are written on firm foundations, that's important. And that's what the Reader is all about, and that's what not-for-profit donors are looking for.
And we only have about 15 seconds left, Bob, but do you anticipate going back to the table and getting this thing done, and what's it going to take?
Yeah, I mean, here's where we're at. Where people are still talking in the background, but the key to all this is let's not get distracted by what happened with this column, and let's not try to throw a bunch of extra stuff at the wall. It seems like we're fighting over who gets to have control of the not-for-profit board of the Reader. Let the not-for-profit board of the Reader control itself. It's a third party to all this. Len and Elsie just need to come to an agreement, which they have already had, about getting this thing transitioned. That's what it's all about, Paris.
And it's coming down to the details of who might control more seats on the board, getting into the minutia there. All right. Bob Reiter, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks, Paris.
Take your bird feeders inside and bring your backyard chickens indoors. There's a bird flu outbreak. According to the Department of Agriculture, up to 18 wild birds in Illinois have tested positive, and with poultry, 80 birds have been affected. However, that toll could be much higher when taking into account suspected deaths from the disease. And joining us now with more are Dr. Yvette Johnson-Walker, clinical epidemiologist and lecturer at the University of Illinois College of Veterinary Medicine, and Dr. Sarah Reach, the head veterinarian and manager of rehabilitation aid and research at Willowbrook Wildlife Center at the Forest Preserve District of DuPage County. Doctors, welcome. Dr. Reach, first put this in context. How big an outbreak of avian flu is this, and what are the consequences?
Yeah, so on the wildlife side, this is pretty big. The 2014-2015 outbreak was considered to be the worst outbreak of avian flu in the U.S., and there were only about 90-something birds or wild birds testing positive at that time. There are over 800 wild birds testing positive this time. So from a wild bird standpoint, this is pretty large. And species affected heavily are things like bald eagles, which are obviously of pretty high importance, ecological importance to us.
And Dr. Johnson-Walker, what about in the poultry market? How is this affecting poultry?
Well, this has been a large outbreak affecting commercial poultry also. Across the country, 29 states have been impacted, and there have been over 229 detections in backyard and commercial poultry flocks. And so this is a pretty serious outbreak from the commercial sector also. Fortunately, in Illinois, we haven't had any commercial facilities affected. There have been 2 backyard flocks that were affected, and In addition, there have been also those detections in wild birds in Illinois.
And Dr. Reach, you were mentioning 2014, 2015. What's behind this outbreak this year?
Yeah, so avian influenza is kind of a general term, or bird flu. There are a variety of types of this virus. They're labeled as H and N, so H5N1 is our current virus going around, but they can be numerous, H5N8, H5N2. And unfortunately, this is a high path avian influenza or highly pathogenic avian influenza. There are also low pathogenic avian influenzas. And actually, those low path avian influenzas do circulate naturally in especially the wild bird population here in the United States, and it's constantly being surveillanced for. The challenge is this is a disease that constantly mutates and recirculates and kind of shares those H's and N's around, and it creates new or kind of repositioned viruses. And unfortunately, this is a high path one, and this is basically just spreading like wildfire when it normally wouldn't affect the birds that it does today.
All right, and certainly we've seen viruses over the last 2 years and learned a lot about them and their spread. Dr. Johnson Walker, might consumers going to the grocery market see the avian flu reflected in prices or availability of poultry?
Well, we'll definitely see some increase in prices, especially in the egg market. It's estimated that about 5% of U.S. layer flocks have been impacted by this outbreak, and so egg prices will definitely be rising. About 9% of the cases we've seen in commercial facilities have been affecting broiler flocks, and so they aren't quite as severely impacted. But turkey flocks are also being affected, and so about 6% of turkey flocks. And so I would anticipate an increase in prices for chicken, eggs, and turkey products in the coming months.
And with respect to eggs, Dr. Johnson Walker, should consumers be worried if the pathogen can spread in those eggs?
No, definitely not. Poultry products, poultry and eggs are safe for people to consume. The really only impact that consumers are going to see is the increase in price. And this is in part because if the poultry products are cooked appropriately, then there's no chance of being exposed to active virus. And in addition, there's constant surveillance in the commercial poultry industry for avian influenza, and any birds that are clinically ill are not producing products for human consumption. They're going to be removed from the food chain. And so poultry products are still going to be safe, but they just may cost a little more.
All right, that's good to know. And Dr. Reach, we mentioned at the top that the advice here is to take away your bird feeders for a while. So expand on that, the things that regular folks should do and the things that naturalists are looking out for in bird habitats.
Yeah, definitely. So the Illinois Department of Natural Resources really just in the last few days put out somewhat of an official notice. It's not a ban or anything like that, but it is the recommendation to remove any bird feeders or baths. They did come back and say seed feeders and not hummingbird feeders, although you have to consider that even though the birds that are feeding from these feeders, whether they are seed feeders like your finches, your sparrows, things like that, or potentially your hummingbirds, your orioles, any of those different kind of feeders, well, those are not the species that are of high concern when it comes to contracting this disease. They can definitely spread the disease. So the disease is very highly spread bird to bird, but also via fomites, which basically are any materials that can transfer virus particles. So that could be birds themselves, that's their feeders, that can be us on our clothing too. And so if any of those virus particles get on the feeders, whether by a bird flying over and pooping on it or breathing on it or something like that, those birds that are currently migrating through Illinois, millions and millions and millions of birds migrating through Illinois, they can then pass that virus on from one place to another. So the current recommendation is to remove those feeders and baths through the end of May, and that's generally because that's really the tail end of migration for us. And so Hopefully things will be settling down at that point. Right. It's also when things are going to start getting much warmer out. And this is a virus that does like cool kind of wet climates. And so the hope is that that will hopefully kind of bring things down as well.
Dr. Johnson-Walker, we only have about 15 seconds here, but I know there's a big debate about free-range chickens and folks that really only want to buy free-range chickens. Should they all be brought indoors?
Well, it's definitely a biosecurity approach that should be considered, that the main thing we want to avoid is having your poultry exposed to free-living wild birds, because as Dr. Reach said, those birds can be harboring and shedding the virus, and so it's a easy route for introduction into your flock. And so it really is recommended that backyard flock owners, commercial flock owners really step up their biosecurity and take the measures that they can to reduce any exposure that their birds may have to wildlife. And one way they can do that is by bringing them indoors under cover.
All right, things that folks can do to stop the spread here. And our thanks to Dr. Yvette Johnson-Walker and Dr. Sarah Reach. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And up next, turning ecological problems in Chicago's native wildlife into works of art. But first, we take a look at the weather. According to a 2020 tree census conducted by Morton Arboretum, the overall number of trees in the region has increased, but not all trees are seen as equals. Some are invasive and prevent native trees and plants from flourishing. Chicago Tonight's Evan Garcia recently checked out 2 local initiatives aimed at repurposing invasive or dead trees. Here's another look.
Tim Mondel is a program coordinator for Cook County Forest Preserves. At Caldwell Woods, he teaches the public how to make their own walking sticks through woodworking.
When you start cutting it right away, it's fairly soft, so we try to go right away, but it sands beautifully, very nicely, and again, as you can see on some of these, it paints well.
These walking sticks are made from a type of wood the Forest Preserve would like to eradicate, European buckthorn.
That's one of the major problems of it, is that it does grow in very dense thickets. It's very shade tolerant.
The non-native buckthorn was brought to North America in the 1800s as an ornamental plant from Europe. Forest Preserve wildlife specialist Kim Koloski says buckthorn creates shady conditions that native plants and trees can't grow under.
They monopolize resources, especially sunlight, drastically.
The small tree is quite effective at spreading. European buckthorn is the most common tree species in the 7-county Chicago region, according to a 2020 tree census by the Morton Arboretum. The invasive species accounts for 36% of all trees in the area. Another invasive species threatening native trees is an insect, the emerald ash borer.
This tree has been dead now for several years. Like I said, it's succumbed from the beetles. And you can see, once we get to this inner bark, you can see all the galleries that have been formed from the insect actually eating the inner bark of the ash tree.
Emerald ash borer larvae can eat through an ash tree's vascular system, killing it in just a few years. The 2020 tree census indicates that over the past 10 years, the number of standing ash trees decreased by 45% in the region. In 2014, the Chicago Park District partnered with the nonprofit Chicago Sculpture International. They formed the Chicago Tree Project, which turns dead trees into works of art.
We'll look to see that it has good public exposure. In this case, this one did. It's by the park. There's an educational component to this one. This particular tree is a sugar maple, but it had a nice girth and breadth, and it was in good shape, so it became a viable project.
The Park District's Manager of Art Initiatives, Mike Dimitrov, and Chicago Sculpture International President Janet Austin recruited artist John Bannon to reimagine this dead tree in Hollywood Park on Chicago's northwest side.
It kind of looks like a lowercase y, so I decided to make it like a string or a rope coming out of the ground with a knot where it splits, and it's just going to be called Why Not. With this project, I like to think it's kind of a purist project where I'm not adding anything to it, it's all subtractive.
Whether it's walking sticks or wooden sculptures, Austin says there's value in repurposing dead or invasive trees.
I think by allowing the pieces to exist in the world a little bit longer, they still are providing nutrients for the ground underneath, places for animals to live, places for insects to live. They are beautiful, giant pieces of wood that are eventually going to be at least a piece of artwork.
For Chicago Tonight, I'm Evan Garcia.
The Forest Preserve's Kim Koloski says the agency has removed 5,000 acres of invasive woody shrubs since she joined 8 years ago. And if you're curious about carving out your own walking stick, the Forest Preserve holds its next Woodworking with Invasives event July 21st at Rolling Knolls in Elgin. Check out the agency's events for more information. And back to wrap things up right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
And that's our show for this Monday night. Please join us tomorrow night live at 7. From weighing Chicago casino sites to offering free gas, we talk with alderpeople ahead of this week's City Council meeting. And we preview the Joffrey Ballet's remix of the John Steinbeck original of Mice and Men. And now for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Paris Schutz. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a great evening.
Thank you.